Looks like you're up and running, Jay.
Yep, it's just sort of doing a, yep, there we go. Okay.
So we have enough for a quorum. We have our 4 primary members and Don.
And 5 crows.
I'll mute those. I was just thinking if we did a roll call, I didn't want to be muted then, so.
Whenever you're ready, Dave, we can.
Yeah, so we have minutes to approve. Does anybody have any comments or want to make a motion on the minutes?
Well, I would make a motion, but I'm just going to ask a question of the group before I do. When I was going down through the minutes, the one thing I wondered was that the minutes from the last meeting reflect that the committee was in favor of maintaining the number of permits being issued on an annual basis. But when that goes to a committee or if that goes to the council, I don't think it's going to tell the whole story, the minutes, I mean by that. Your follow-up communication, Jay, mentioned something that I think clarified it, but I believe that the committee was in approval of maintaining it the way it was because by state mandate, we had to have 134 anyway. And what I'm wondering is, should the minutes reflect the numbers, because that really tells a very clear story to anybody reading those minutes. In other words, we said, yes, we're okay with the 135 because we actually have to have by state mandate 134. And then that seems to, at least in my mind, to somebody who has not been present for this meeting, might help them understand a little bit better as to why the committee was in favor of approving that, or at least forwarding that recommendation on.
Okay.
Just a thought.
So right now under that item, as you said, it's pretty brief. It says the committee discussed this element at length and decided that changing the building permit pool annual allocation would not be a good idea at this time based on state requirements and the town's history of permit allocations over the last 10 years. Maybe we could just add a sentence that says the information provided by staff indicated that the over the last 10 years, the average annual, the allocation would be 134 units, which is
right,
one less than the current 135.
Correct. Just something that indicated that based on the state mandate, we would have to provide a minimum of 134, and we're actually at 135, which is why we feel that it's, you know, not something to be played with at this time. I don't know if anybody else feels that a clarification makes sense or not, but to me, that just kind of nails down, certainly in my mind, why I'm fine with the 135.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I propose something? Did you all see the comments that I had proposed on the minutes? Because I'm wondering if we don't need to just send around the revised minutes, because I can't think on my feet this morning or something. I don't have enough caffeine or something. So, or am I making a mountain out of a molehill?
So I believe the revised minutes that you had sent around were provided.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to look at those, and just on those, I did have, so under the revisiting, and maybe it would be helpful if I pulled them up.
Yep.
Okay, let me do that. Oh, where did I hide those? Give me a minute. Where did I keep those? Hopefully under long-range planning minutes, which would make the most sense. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen here in a minute, once I can find where everyone, there we go. All right, are you seeing my screen at this time?
Yes.
Okay, so Robin. So under the first one, so you're gonna see red and blue. The red is what Robin had proposed, and as I read them, I just made some suggestion on that. And we can see what makes the most sense here. And I'll just say, maybe what I'll just start by saying the one adjustment I made to what Robin had proposed was, Robin, in yours, you talked about, as I read it, that the 2017 changes to the reserve pool were actually what removed the rollover. And that wasn't what happened at that time. That was done in 2008. So I simply struck that and added to bring the cap, or to bring the pool to 500.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you, Jay.
So I'm going to go ahead and accept that for ease of reading.
Hey, Jay, I know you explained this in your memo, but that's a key distinction, you know, why you're recommending to leave it as is. And I think, I don't know, I think people are more likely to read your memo than they are the minutes, but for the uninitiated, that's a key, that's a subtlety that is, you know, might be missed, you know, so I don't know how best to capture that. Because if the recommendation is to do nothing there, this is, I know, one of the areas of particular concern. So without the additional rationale that has been discussed, you know, by Alan and others, that might be missed. So I don't know if you, and I don't want to be dancing on the head of a pin here, but I don't know if you see understand my point there.
So you're saying that the memo provides sort of the rationale, is what you're saying?
Yeah, your memo explains it here, and I understand the need for this to be clear in the record and the minutes, but I'm assuming if you use your memo, I think we'll be okay. But if we end up getting the recommendations without, further explanation, that's very likely to get lost by the council, and it would help me help explain when we get questions.
Yeah, if you-
That was, yeah.
That's really the point you were making previously as well, Alan, I think, right?
Yeah, totally,
Yep.
totally. The memo described things a little bit better than the actual minutes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So depending upon which document people were reading,
Yeah.
they'd get more information out of one than they would in the other. And my concern was that if they only read the minutes, that they'd lose a lot of the value of the discussion.
Yep. So
So-
I don't mean to be repetitive, but sorry if I am, but that's a good point. I'm trying to think through to how this is going to be received, when you report out. So, but
Sure.
I agree with what Alan's saying. It ought to, I suppose, ought to flow from the source document.
So does adding this sentence sort of capture, I mean, it's, again, we're.
Yeah.
And maybe
The reference-
I could add that same sort of sentence, Alan, to the changing the building pool permit discussion.
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think as long as we make sure that people know that there's additional information,
Yeah.
then at least the record, I will call it, which is the minutes, will at least reference it, and I think we'll be in a better position.
Okay.
Is it possible to attach the memo to the minutes?
I suppose we could. I guess, our memo, this memo will wind up going to the ordinance committee. It's part of the record. It's in, we could.
Jay, I'm comfortable. I can catch that. I can pick up on that loop when it comes
Okay.
forward.
And we're also directing them towards it now.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, typically minutes don't have attached agenda items. That's, but I don't see why we couldn't attach it. I just trying to figure out how best to do that.
If they clearly cross-reference each other. That's the,
But if we want the minutes attached, I can just do a little thing right here, say the staff memo dated July 2020 is hereby attached. And then what I can do is just copy and paste it right after here. Is that
good, Jay? Yep.
so? It seems like we were comfortable with these two proposed changes, I believe. Then the next was, I think we're all going to be fine with the is/are. Thank you. And then under summary of next steps, I think this, again, you're just clarifying really what we're going to talk about. So I think those were the changes you had proposed, Robin, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, thank you.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I see Rick is actually joined. Sorry, Rick. I was looking at other things. Missed that you had joined us.
Any further comments on the minutes?
I move to approve as changed or as modified.
Second,
Yeah. All in favor?
So just a reminder, we do need to do roll call votes when there is a vote. I'm happy to call names, Dave, or you can.
Thank you,
Just
Jay.
let me know
Yep,
how you
go
want
right
to.
ahead.
All
Yep,
right.
go right ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Hamel?
Hey, just a quick question. Am I voting? I don't think I'm a voting member, am I?
So
As a liaison.
as I understand it, you are the council liaison, the council member alternate. So since that Jean Marie is not here, I believe you, the way it's structured is that you would at this point be a voting member.
Thank you. I would never pass an opportunity to vote. So thank you.
Mr. Paul,
Approved as noted.
Mr. Merrill,
Approved.
Ms. Saunders,
yes, approved.
Ms. Roy,
Yes, approved.
and Mr. Shanae. And Rick, you're muted. I'm gonna click the
There we go.
there
Can
we
you
go.
hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I can't see me, but I see all of you. So anyway, if you can hear me, we're good.
Yep.
I vote to approve. I've heard the whole discussion. I just couldn't get in.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't seen you over there.
Jay, are we supposed to be recording this?
We are.
Oh, it is. Oh, there it is. I see it up there. Okay, thank you.
And hang on, I'm sorry. I just hit something on my computer and I sort of lost where. Lost the... All right. Come on. Why is this?
Okay, I think I'm in now.
Yes, you are in. Yep.
And as I say, I was in and heard your entire discussion. I couldn't. I'm here now, but I heard everything.
Great.
Thanks, Rick.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. Sounds like, oh, actually, I'm going to make sure I save these. Stop share.
Okay, next item is continued discussion on the growth management ordinance. So, Jay, anything further you want to?
Yeah, I thought I might just start with a quick summary of where I think we're at. And we just sort of talked a bit about it through the minutes. But yeah, so just by way of quick summary. Oops, why is this? Oops. So let's see. So as we know, the ordinance committee has asked the long range planning committee for some initial recommendations on really sort of 5 key elements that were flagged in the email from Jean Marie of a month or 2 ago. And those items were report out on sort of the annual permits, the annual allocation of permits. The reserve pool decision from 2017, and I guess what I'll do is I'll recap where I think we're at on these items as well. With regards to the annual allocation of permits, we did a pretty thorough review of the data from the last 10 years, and that indicated that there was 134. The 10-year average is 134, where the current allocation is 135. This committee at this point feels that there really doesn't seem to be a need for change one direction or the other on that number, as I sort of understand it. The other question was on the was asked to take a look at the reserve pool decision of 2017. As I remember the conversation, the committee seemed to indicate that, you know, the 2017 made sense based on the information that was available at that time, but that any future considerations of the reserve pool should require a more in-depth update of the data sets with regards to the impacts on the community. We had also talked about a bit about how the 2017 decision at this point, you know, the only, with the reserve pool, the council's authority with the current language is to increase the reserve pool. The decreasing of the reserve pool is only done by actually allocating those permits. So it seemed like the committee was, again, felt like the 17 decision was sound based on the data that was available, but any further action should require more review. The next one has to do with how we treat fractional units with regards to growth permits. And I think that's one of the things that we felt we didn't have enough time to really dive into at the last meeting and wanted to discuss some more. I think, as I understand it right now, there's, I think, the main discussion point is to really think around the parameters and the impacts of those 2/3 units, as I recall our discussion, more so than anything else, but certainly we'll dive into that, I think, further today. Also, the next item was allocation of permits by developers and or developments. We got into that discussion also sort of at the very end. I guess it was towards the end, I don't know, the very end of the last meeting. And I know that was something that this committee had wanted to continue to discuss. So we'll pick that up again. I'm not sure where we've landed on that one yet. And then the fifth and final item that was in Jean Marie's email was around the moratorium. And I believe that the consensus of the committee was a moratorium is, they're really not seeing a need for a moratorium at this point. So if I've captured our discussion right, or at least close from our last meeting, it seems as though we've dealt with 3 out of the 5 questions largely. And we're really going to continue to talk today about primarily about sort of the fractional units, the allocation of permits by developers. And then in staff's memo, we did include 2 other items, more administrative items to think about and what we want to do with those. But in terms of Jean Marie's email, that's what I have.
I think Don's got a question, Jay.
Hey, Jay, just a quick question. I don't mean to jump ahead of the queue here, but as you go through this with the committee, yeah, I think you've captured those 4 things quite clearly in terms of our request of the Long Range Planning Committee. The only other 2 things I'd mention is consistent with your mission. You know, we're also interested in anything in general that may be broader, having to do with strategic or long range issues that may go beyond those 4 specific things. So it's in the memo. There's someplace it probably got buried, but if there's anything in addition to those 4 things that you and your committee feel is important for us to focus on, we would welcome that as well. Thank you.
Robin?
Yeah, I guess 2 things sort of along the same lines that Dawn is thinking. I thought we were going to get some information about sort of, I know Betsy had talked about the number of parking spaces for access to natural resources. I had mentioned we have data on the number of acres of wetlands that are being filled on an annual basis to consider those broader strategic issues. But then I was also wondering if you brought up a key point too, Jay, in the issues not to backtrack. But one of the things you mentioned about the 2017 reserve pool is that the only way to decrease that number is from drawing on the allocated permits. Am I safe to assume, with respect to this, the decrease being the only method, that the town council has the sovereignty to revisit that at any time if they did want to decrease it or anything?
I would think, yes, the council, it would require an ordinance amendment, but certainly they could do that, yes.
Okay. And so regarding my other question about, or sort of adding on to Don's broader strategic issues, when do we expect that data, and is that supposed to fold into this conversation?
So we are actively working on pulling that data together, working on the school enrollment information, working on trying to verify or look at, traffic impacts, from state, national, local data with regards to different unit sizes. So we're pulling those things together. I guess I'm not, probably in September or so, I would say we probably have that stuff pulled together. As I understand the conversation, or at least the conversations I've had with Jean Marie, at this point, what she's asking this committee for is sort of those initial recommendations and what type of additional information this committee thinks would be important to gather. So I think exactly as you just laid out there, Robin, if those are the type of elements that would be good for any reporting out by this initial reporting out by the long range planning committee to include to the ordinance committee, say, hey, as we think about these things, these are the type of key information pieces we'll need before further decisions are made. I think would be the way I would characterize that.
That's really great insight, Jay. I appreciate that, because I feel like we can almost, when the data comes in September, we'll consider it sort of a data-based baseline for us, for the long range planning committee to consider as we move forward. Is that sort of the approach that I should be looking at this with, maybe? As far as seeing the data after we've made these decisions.
Well, again, so I think right now, as I understand it, and as Jean Marie said in her email, they're looking for initial recommendations and thoughts.
Perfect.
I understand this to be an ongoing discussion. I could be, obviously the council ordinance committee will do, they are the executive, they're the elected body, so they'll do what they wish.
Okay.
But that is my understanding of it, is that, hey, what information are we missing? Where are our, so I think they're really looking to this committee to identify blind spots.
Okay.
And I think you just touched on a couple of them.
Thank you.
Before we proceed, can I just ask, is there any public in attendance at this meeting that we're not seeing?
So yeah, I don't know if you see the participants list, but yes, we do have a number of folks from the public. So I was waiting for the next item, or the first item on the agenda after the update here is public comment. So I think once we get to that, we'll ask folks to raise their hands and we'll bring them in.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
I guess I'd like, before I forget it, but I'd like to just reinforce that in the comp plan, we are trying very hard to address the traffic issue internally by bringing housing closer to all the services that are needed in terms of live, work, and bringing housing closer to the services people need. That's what we can do internally. A big problem, a lot of our traffic problem is pass-through traffic, but from an internal perspective, really what we need to do is reduce the number of trips locally, which we're trying to address through, again, bringing the housing to our core not trying to spread ourselves out, spread the infrastructure out, and bring the services closer to where we live. So I think, again, several of the public and council members have brought up the traffic issue. It continues to be an issue, and it's not like we're forgetting it, but internally, this is one of the things that we're trying to recommend going forward. That a little bit of emphasis there going forward.
So the next item on the agenda is public comment, if we're ready for that, Mr. Chair.
Are we ready? Is everybody okay on growth management? Are we? I don't see any comment. So,
Are you asking, I'm sorry, was that for the public? Maybe I missed.
no, are we through with the growth management discussion? I guess is my
Well,
question. Does anybody
well,
have any? Yeah.
We will continue the growth management discussion after
Okay.
public comment.
Okay, maybe okay. I'm looking at an old agenda. I apologize. Yeah.
That was probably
Move
last
on.
month,
Is there
yep.
any public comment?
All right, so I do see one hand up. I'm going to bring Betsy Gleistein in to talk. Bear with me a moment, Betsy. There we go.
Well, yeah, good morning. Nice to see everyone on your side. Hopefully I'm coming in okay. I don't have the best connection, so I apologize. You can kind of shout me down if you want. If you can't hear me, let me know. Yeah, I look forward to hearing more of the discussion today. So it's a little bit difficult to make comments before hearing the discussion. In terms of the the impacts that Robin mentioned, the environmental and the impacts to natural resources with additional growth, those definitely were brought forward to the ordinance committee well before they came to long range planning. I know I personally have sent at least 2, if not 3 emails trying to make sure that those issues get looked at. So I'm glad you brought that back up, and I hope that the committee continues to look at that. I actually even made suggestions to changes to the ordinance, the words in the ordinance, to make sure that the growth management ordinance is reflecting those aspects now whenever it's employed. And then the other comment I had was I've had a little trouble, this little housekeeping, seeing some of the materials. Your plan is for posting the materials for other folks to see. There was quite a large presentation given last time. I don't know how people are supposed to look at that. They can go back and, I guess, watch the recording. It would definitely be helpful if you can find a way to have the town post any materials that you looked at, along with and they may have been in the agenda, but the agenda wasn't available right now. So anyway, I would just encourage to make sure that the town easily access all the materials that you guys have seen, that other people can see it, so they can reference that as they're going through your regulations. And I think you brought that forward, but just to make sure. And Dave just referenced traffic. I think, one of the things I've heard about traffic is, yes, one of the major concerns is we are putting so much growth on the Route 1 corridor and around the Route 114 Oak Hill corridor that, yeah, you've brought the growth in. So maybe the traffic problems may or may not be as much outside, but it seems like the type of development and the type of people that we have moving to Scarborough still are commuting to somewhere, and they need to get in their car and get on Route 1 and go through Oak Hill intersection. We don't have, they're still largely commuters to Portland or somewhere else for work. And so I think that traffic as a whole is still a problem in terms of the amount of growth that we're experiencing with the road system that we currently have. So I do think that's still a big factor. I guess I would also ask, I did ask this question the other night of the town manager, but I think it'll be worth this committee making sure that you have answers on, are there any other infrastructure issues with the types of housing that we're building and the numbers of housing that we're building? Perhaps an update from the fire chief. We got a statement from the fire chief as a counselor not too long ago that the Downs has not counted in how much of the what's needed for fire protection. So we've got police services, we've got fire protection, we've got public works. I guess the one thing I've kind of seen missing from this overall discussion from long range planning is how you would make your decision. Like, what are you basing it on? So you looked at like past numbers to say, okay, the state requires 135, 134, so we're at 135, and so that sounds about right, you know. And that one's pretty clear. But as you get into the other aspects of the growth pool and also the fractionalization, what are you comparing it to say, you know, this is how much fire protection is needed with these many houses in place. You know, this is how much sewage capacity is needed with these many multi-units in place, because I know the multi-units often take more. You know, so I think besides school, you know, we're missing what's the impact from a quantitative aspect on other public services, particularly our public safety, our fire and EMS, and our public works. I know that you said, you know, we should not do a moratorium, and you know, that was just based on, I wasn't exactly sure what that recommendation was based on, other than maybe it seems like a bad idea to do a moratorium, or because we're at the 134. So I hope you discuss that a little more, because I wasn't quite sure what that was based on, other than the 135, but not necessarily on the fractionalization as well as the growth pool. So I would have several other thoughts on, you know, a moratorium, and I hope the committee discusses that more extensively, even though you discussed it briefly about why you're not recommending that and what are the factors that are including of why that should not be considered. Even if you weren't going to recommend it, what are the factors that you put into that decision? I did also have one more question from Jay. I don't have the past presentation in front of me, and I've requested some of the past materials that you guys have looked at. But it seems like that there were some things that have come up on the planning board now, some that are not in that past presentation. So I was just hoping that you could take a look at that and see, are all the new requests that have been coming in front of the planning board that have been approved or in the works, are they in the presentation, or does that presentation need some updating? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Betsy.
Jay, if I might express some issue.
Sure.
Both people that have spoken just recently talking about the traffic situation with developments that we have, and certainly they've been being considered all along. Angela, I'm on that transportation committee, and we've had just a hard time getting together as a committee. So we need to figure out, you know, where is Angela at in the thought and the committee, that committee, as it plays into development and traffic.
Battery 50%. Connect.
Yeah, obviously, we've had a number of our advisory committees have been on a bit of hiatus here, and
Yeah.
we, that's certainly slowed some
'Cause we've-
discussions, but staff continues to think about the issues, and we'll be prepared when we're able to get the advisory committees back together again to continue those discussions. I know the governor did just extend the state of emergency another 30 days the other day, so we'll continue to track how this pandemic impacts our workload. Do you see
Thank you.
there's a couple other people on the attendees list, but I'm not seeing any hands go up. I don't know if folks know that raise your hand feature is at the bottom of the page typically anyway. I think all the folks who are on the attendees list I've seen use the feature before, Dave, so
Okay.
maybe that we've run our course on public comment.
Okay, sounds good. So let's continue our discussion on the GMO. I mean, I think just briefly, your summary is just that in the memorandum, is a summary of the various data points that we've looked at, that you've looked at, and you've provided to us. Robin suggested some other things to look at over the course of our discussion. But I think, I guess Jay, weigh in if there are other pieces of information and data out there that we need to look at, or that the public needs to have access to. I believe it's all out there, either in reference through the town website. So maybe it just needs to be called out as something that we are reviewing as part of our ongoing discussion and eventual implementation. Sounds like somebody has some wind going on or something out there in the world.
Oh, it's me with a fan. Let me move it.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. That's better.
It was right behind my iPad. It's hot in the room that I'm in. Is that better?
Perfect. Yep.
Good.
So shall we move into the fractionalization? It seems to be where we kind of left off last time.
So I guess in order to start the discussion, I don't know if Jay or staff have put together anything that might help us understand how many half units there's been, how many 2/3 units there's been, and how many 1 units there has been in the past several years. Is there any information like that available, Jay?
Yeah, so if you remember the presentation that we provided back in June and went over at the last meeting, we discussed that, and I'm going to try to share my screen again. And I think this is one of the items that Betsy was just referencing, certainly needs to be updated, as this presentation was drafted in late June. So there is certainly some updates to be made, and we can need to think about where I just did put together some information for Tom, I think. So anyway, basically, I'll just give what I have here, and then I can speak to what I can recall that we've amended. So well, this is really about the reserve pool. Sorry, I'm looking for the fractional permits.
Yeah, page
Yep.
14. There you go.
There it is. That's the
Yep.
one. Thank you. Oh, goodness. Let's see.
The page before that too, Jay.
Yeah, so again, these were the informational factors that really went into the, I'll call it 2007 and 2008 decision-making process. And I call it 2007 and 2008 because, as you'll recall, as part of our previous discussion, talked about how in 2007 is when council updated the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, to allow for density calculations to be considered based on fractional units. The 1 bedrooms being a half a unit, 2 bedrooms under 1,200 square feet being counted as 2/3 a unit. That's for density calculation purposes. Then in 2008 was the decision to update the growth management ordinance to have growth permits follow the density requirements in the zoning ordinance. And so these were sort of the data sets that were used as part of those conversations. And I think that's, these are the items that we currently have. We actually have a summer intern who's tracking down some of this information. So that'll help inform this. I'm currently working with the school department to track down sort of what we're seeing from actual school impacts from the multifamilies that have been developed and occupied within the last 2 to 3 years. So we are tracking some of that information. I will note that one of the items that the intern is looking at is working with our land trust and with our community services folks is trying to understand access to the natural resources, looking at, what's happened with beach pass sales might help to start to inform some of that discussion over the last 10 years. What do we have in terms of public open spaces and how much parking is available at each one of the trail systems? And though we don't necessarily have, hard data in terms of when those are full, but really trying to have that more qualitative discussion with the land trust and with others in town about how often are these places full, and so we're trying to pull that information together. So that'll all be part of what can inform future discussions. And so Alan, I think your question was, what have we done in terms of the fractional permits? And I think you'll see here, are you seeing them all? I'm trying to, yep, you are. These are the projects that, again, through June had received fractional permits. I'm trying to think. Forgive me, I don't know that I've had enough coffee either yet this morning, Robin. I can't remember if in the last, month and a half, if there's been, obviously I can get the information, I just don't have it up, off the top of my head right now. But what you'll see is what's occurred in terms of fractional units, the types of projects and where they were.
Yeah, I see that information. I guess I was thinking more in terms of we've issued 46.5 permits. We've issued 83.667 or 2/3 permits, that type of data. What I'm curious in trying to understand is there a particular unit that is not being used very much? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. So,
I mean, I think the 1-bedroom units that we've had a fair share of those in the past few years, and obviously the full units we've had those. I don't know how often we actually use the 2/3 one.
I understand what you're saying. You're asking for the hard. So if we were add up the total, these totals, how many have been half units? How many have been 2/3 units?
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. We have that information. That's numbers I'd have to run for you. And
Yeah, no,
but I understand the question now. Yep.
It's just in trying to get an understanding of whether we do we need to keep breaking this down, or can we live with, a half unit and 1 full unit in terms of discussion?
I'll say from my having not run the numbers, but just based on what's kicking around in my head this morning, I believe most of them have been, I'd say more than half have been half units.
Yeah.
The 1 bedrooms. There certainly have been 2/3 bedrooms. But I don't know
Units,
if
yep.
that's, I'm sorry, yep, units. I don't know if that's a third, a quarter, you know, if it's
Yeah.
a full 50-50, but to me, it feels like it's been more half units than 2/3 units. But again, I'll have those numbers for you. We can pull that stuff together, certainly.
So predominantly one-bedroom condominiums.
So just real quick, Jay, just to clarify, that's half of the one-bedroom units are fractionalized, meaning that's the only time that they're really used is when there's one bedroom unit. I'm so sorry. I feel like
Yep.
I'm
So,
splitting hairs, but I'm trying to understand.
so the way you get a half a unit is if you have one bedroom or less, so it could be a studio, and less than 750 square feet. So you have to have both those things to count as a half a unit. To count as 2/3 of a unit, it's 2 bedrooms and less than 1,200 square feet. So I think one of the questions, and I know, you know, if Karen Martin were here, one of the things that she had been thinking about and thought was a pretty good question was around, is it bedroom size that is a driver? Is it unit size that's a driver? Or is it truly that combination of both? And I think those are the type of, that's the type of data that we're trying to pull together to see if we can help inform this discussion. And so again, I think as I've understood it, and I think, you know, from the ordinance committee, I don't know that they're necessarily going to look for the long range planning committee to pin down an absolute recommendation coming out of this discussion. It's, you know, and certainly if you feel like you're in a place to do that, that's fine. But if you feel like, hey, we need more information, I think that's part of, I believe this is part of the information gathering process. As in my conversations with Jean Marie, it's really about, okay, what is it that we know? What is it, where don't we know things? And it sounds like this is one of those areas based on our short conversation last time, and maybe as part of this conversation goes, where this is a more information needed type discussion, maybe.
But
All right, so,
I'm sorry.
no, I
Can
was
I
just gonna say, so in order to just clarify that in my mind, if you have a one bedroom that's greater than 750 square feet, how many units do you use for that?
If it's under 1,200, so if it's a one bedroom and it's 1,000 square feet, it would be a 2/3 a unit.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay,
And
so the distinction is more leaning towards square footage than bedrooms then.
It's both. It's the word "and" is critical, because you could have a 2-bedroom that's less than seven. If you have a 2-bedroom at 700 square feet, we would count that as 2/3.
Okay,
I think the other, not that we can get the data, but the correlation between cars and bedrooms is one thing, as well as school kids per bedroom, you know, I think are the couple of the correlating pieces of data. Not that we can get those, but I think an understanding of address traffic and to address the school load. Not sure how we get that, but I think to have a understanding of the correlation would be nice.
well, I think they've got that right in one of the slides I just saw. They talked about the number of people, right? I think it's right here, the number of people that generally
Yeah.
occupy these size spaces.
Correct. And so this is one of the, as I said, the sort of data points that we would like to get an update on. I think we've been, you know, this is, you know, information that's now 13 years old. So looking at, excuse me, we have our intern sort of exploring the national data, looking at the American Planning Association website, the Urban Institute's website, and really trying to you know, drive at it from the big picture, but then we're also trying to get down to the regional and local question as well. So that's why it takes a while to pull these pieces of information together. So we're working towards that. Because I think just one of the things, actually, I'll leave it at that. I know Robin's got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, my question was more along the lines of, yeah, definitely we need the national data so that we can, you know, see what's happening kind of a thing, Jay. But I really honor sort of the statements that you're saying about, you're in it every day. And I really trust your judgment and honor your wisdom in when you say that roughly half are fractionalized. So when you say that roughly half, you were saying roughly half of the 1 bedrooms are fractionalized that come in front of you. I want to understand sort of your initial answer kind of a thing that said, if you were to, you know, hazard a guess, how many of the 1 and 2 bedrooms are fractionalized? And I'm really sorry to put you on the spot. Feel free to withdraw whatever statement. I truly would like to just get a gut feel from you as to how often these are used.
Yeah, so I guess I think we're saying slightly different things here. So I
Okay.
want to try to clarify.
Thank you.
The question you're asking is how many, as I hear you asking the question I'm hearing is how many 1 bedrooms in the community are being built that are coming in for fractional units or asking to be fractionalized? Is that?
Sorry, nope, that's what I heard you say, was that like
Okay.
half of that 1 bedrooms are fractionalized.
No,
But
no,
really
no.
the question is, what is your gut sense? You just throw it out there, Jay. How often you use it?
So then I will, what I said previously, then I wasn't clear, because that wasn't what I intended to say. What I meant to say is of the growth permits, and I'm still sharing my screen, is that correct?
Yep.
Yes, I am. So of the growth permits you're seeing here, you know, if we add all these numbers up together, you know, we'll get to what, let's just say 350 or something like that. My gut would tell me probably 2/3 of those have been in the half unit number, and the other third was been in the 2/3 or the 2 bedroom or less type units. Is that a little more clear?
It
Right.
is, and those are the units that have been fractionalized. So the next question I have is how often in the grander scheme of things is fractionalization implemented or taken advantage of all the development, Jay?
Oh, okay, so you're asking now, I think maybe. Bear with me, I'm trying to get to the slide that shows. So if I'm hearing your question, Robin, what you're asking is, so the gray, you remember we've seen this slide now a couple times, the gray is the total number of units in a given year that are granted. You would like to see, what I'm hearing is this, I'm just going to use this 499 number. It'd be nice to see sort of in here, how many were single family? How many were half units? Nope, that's not what you're asking. All right,
My question is even more simple. My question is,
Okay.
of
I
those
like simple.
Yeah, of those 496, is it a quarter of them that use fractionalization? Do all of them use fractionalization? Do 0 of them use fractionalization? Where on the spectrum of all the 496 permits in 2017 or in 2020 would you say take advantage of this fractionalization?
Okay, so if we use the 2020 as
Yep.
as a good example, because I think we actually have, actually, I think all those numbers might be parsable by what we have here, but where it was 73 total units, if we come back to the previous slide, in 2020, we've issued, again, this is as of June, 20 growth permits, or so 40 units, 20 growth permits. So if this is total units, right, that means we've had 33 were whole unit growth permits. Could be single family, a 2-bedroom greater than 1,200 square feet, whatever the case may be, but 33 out of the 73 were whole, 43 were fractional. Is that the
That
type?
is exactly what I was looking for, Jay. And so this information is here. It just needs to be
Yep.
extrapolated or reconfigured. Got it. Okay. So it is a very important tool then that is used to issue growth permits.
It is certainly a very important tool. The fractionalized units is certainly a very important tool to enable, and we talked about this a little bit last time, larger multifamily developments to move forward. As you
Okay.
recall, we sort of talked about how, if you're limited to, only, what was it, 27 growth permits in a given year for a project? Well, if South Portland Housing is trying to build a 60-unit senior affordable housing development, and this is before, actually, planning board, did you just approve it? I think you might have. I can't remember. Anyway, it's before the planning board. Those 60 units are going to equate to 30 growth permits. You can't sort of build a roof in a building and not have all the units go in at once.
Perfect. So basically fractionalization allows us to get more dense development in target areas where we need it.
That's one of the things it does. Yes.
Thank you so much for walking me through that, Jay. I really appreciate your patience.
And Jay, the numbers that we're using to determine a 2/3 unit or a 1/2 unit is consistent with other communities or other ways of calculating that?
Sorry, I'm also trying to take minutes as we go, so
All right, sorry.
that's quite okay. Again, the question I heard was, do other communities have the fractional units? Is that?
Well, to be more specific.
Yep.
Are the fractional units that we're using and the criteria to determine the fractional unit consistent, I'll say, in the industry or in, in many communities? Is this kind of like a national standard that we're applying here? Or is this just something that we developed on our own
I would
in terms
say
of square footage and bedrooms?
largely something we developed on our own based on national and state data, based on the data points we talked about here.
Okay.
So that is actually another question that we are exploring this summer, and we're trying to find I'm not sure if there are other communities in the state right now that do fractional units. There may be, I just haven't found them. It sounds like, and I have a call into Wyndham actually may be looking at our ordinance and using that as a point of discussion to update their ordinances potentially. So hopefully I've answered the question at least as best I can.
Yeah, no, I was just curious as to whether there was any kind of national standards or anything that we could also be reviewing, which may or may not be fair just based on actual population and size. But I guess I was just more curious as to where the numbers came from.
Yeah, and again, I think the numbers really came from looking at these type of data points and trying to understand the impacts. Do you want me to continue to share my screen, or would it be helpful for everyone to see everyone? I realized I'm dominating your computers. Do you want me
I'm
to-
fine. I'm fine with it up, Jay. I don't know about others, but
problem.
I have another question, I guess. When did we adopt the fractionalization policy?
2007.
So 2007?
Yep.
Is when the zoning ordinance was updated. to allow
Mhm.
for density purposes.
Okay, and
2008 was when the growth management ordinance was updated to allow growth permits to be issued in accordance with the same fractionalization.
so I guess I would want to understand too, what was happening in 2005, 2006. So if you could go back one slide to understand why fractionalization was invented or discovered or implemented. Actually, can you go back to the bar graph? I guess that's what I was thinking I was looking for. Yep, that one. Yeah. So, oh, we don't have the data. Okay. I was hoping to look to see what was happening in 2005, 2006 to understand why the town adopted fractionalization.
Yeah, I could certainly pull out those memos.
That would be helpful for me.
Yep.
Thank you, Jay.
Yep. Actually, Dave, while we have a short pause here, I see Tom Hall has his hand up and
Hey, yep.
you're,
Yeah, I don't have that. Yep, go ahead, Tom.
okay. Let me click Tom's. Tom, you should be, yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to offer a comment as regards the fractional units. And Jay, there is a good memo that explains the context and the backdrop in 2007 and 8 that gave rise to this discussion and ultimately bringing forward this notion of fractional units. So if you can't find it, I think I can put my hands on it. We'll share that with the group. But in addition to kind of enabling density, and it's kind of the practical realities, I think your example of, you know, a 60 unit building, 60 units in a single building, you can't simply build, you know, half of them at once. Practically speaking, you need to do it all at once. I think there's also a recognition that impact is different depending on size and, more importantly, bedrooms. And I think we've studied that ourselves, and I think there's some national studies that are very clear on that point. And so I just wanted to make, that's my real point I want to make, is that I think there's a definite difference in impact on municipal and school services on smaller units, particularly with fewer bedrooms.
And I think that data goes into many of Jay's graphs here.
Yep.
I know from my memory, I recall the discussions that went into that in 2007 and 2008. I know we had a number of discussions about that as a town and also as a committee. So digging out some of that background data would probably be helpful for the members.
Certainly do that.
That's it. You can unmute me or take me off, Jay.
All right. The boss gave me permission, so I'm doing it. So I guess as part of this discussion, I'm certainly hearing that this is something the committee feels should continue to be looked at, but we're certainly missing data to be able to make any informed decisions at this point. And so, again, where I feel we're at now, not to say this is the end of this item, but it would be the recommendation to the ordinance committee. Again, the ordinance committee is meeting on August 20th and looking for these initial recommendations. What would be to continue to explore fractionalization, try to and have that information or any decisions moving forward be based on updated data sets and information as we discussed, and I'll try to enumerate in a memo as I go through my notes here. Is that?
Yep, I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Fairly concise and accurate, most
Well done.
importantly, accurate description of where we're at.
Well done, Jay. Thank you.
So one of the other things that we ran out a little bit of time last meeting to talk about, we had a brief discussion around it, was the allocation of permits by project. And so again, I'll give the same sort of background that I given previously and actually just touched on a few moments ago. So right now the ordinance says that, any one development can only obtain 20% of the annual allocation growth permits. 20% of 135 is 27 growth permits. What we talked about is there are some projects in the community, such as Dunstan Crossing, Eastern Village, the Downs, that are of a size and scale that they actually have multiple subdivisions within a bigger picture. So they'll get an overall map subdivision, and then they'll come in for smaller subdivisions or site plans for particular pieces of those. And so that's how they've been able to obtain, more than 27 in those larger projects, but again, based on the smaller project allocation. So I think the question that the ordinance committee was asking is, what's the long range planning committee's feel of that? What more can we offer for that discussion?
Jay, I guess to understand that, so has a developer come up against this allocation, or because of the phasing, has it not been actually had to come into implementation? Is that?
No, so we certainly have done this, as I said, in those projects that I just referenced. So I would say, using any one of those projects as an example, if it is that they have been able to do more than 27, or I'm sorry, been able to obtain more than 27 growth permits in a given year. Again, because of the size of their project, they sort of parse out different projects within the development. So I think, I'll use the Downs as a really good example, just because it's the most recent. That first phase of residential that I think we're all familiar with on the right-hand side was built, those guys did an incredible job within, it seemed like within a year, but maybe it was 18 months, something to that effect. There were some 150 odd units, or 100, maybe it was closer to 130, 30 single families, I think some 90 odd multifamilies, some duplexes. And so, there were different, there were different subdivisions within the overall Downs project. So the single families, if I remember right, the single families were sort of part of one subdivision. The carriage walk, which are those 4 apartments further into the development right before the single families, were part of a separate subdivision site plan application. And then Mill Commons, that first piece of the project as you drive by, was yet another subdivision or site plan within that project.
Jay,
yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Again, not enough caffeine yet this morning. I had a very late night last night. So is a common plan of development like the Downs considered one? Well, let me back up by saying, is the 20% allocation by developer or by development?
I can read you the language. I thought I had it highlighted. That's that one. There we go. So let's see, during each calendar year, no more than 20% of the growth permits available from the annual allocation should be issued for dwelling units within any one subdivision or other development. And so again, the way that we've looked at this, and it's been in consultation with our town attorney, is that it's sort of projects can have sort of subdivisions within the overall, I like the term you use, common plan of development. I think that's a good way. If we think of a common plan of development as the Downs, Eastern Village, Dunstan Crossing, very large projects spread across, many acres. Within that common scheme of development, there are multiple subdivisions within that. And so it's each subdivision within that is eligible for the 20%.
Okay, perfect. And so along those same lines, for example, just to use a different, maybe smaller context, like Eastern Village or Dunstan Crossing, those larger areas too, Jay, are each of their phases is considered, is given a 20% allocation?
No, it's really each subdivision as approved by the planning board.
Okay.
So
Got
again, I think I'll use Eastern Village, which maybe is another good example. South Village, the apartment complex that went
Got
in
it.
2 years ago, that was separate. North
Perfect.
Village
Yeah,
will be
separate.
considered separate.
Okay, so perfect. Thank you very much.
So conceivably, if you run the math on that, a developer could have a large development, break it up into 5 subdevelopments, and consume all 135 building permits available that year.
Conceivably,
I mean, it's not probable, but
right? Theoretically, or even practically.
theoretically, they could do that.
Hasn't happened yet, but yes, that.
Okay.
Dave, I do see Tom actually has his hand up again.
Okay, yep.
So, sorry, Tom, if you can hang in there for a while. You're now up, Tom.
No, I didn't. Sorry, I didn't lower my hand. My mistake.
Oh, all right. Talk to you later.
Hey, Jay,
Yes. Go ahead, Don, I think.
just a quick comment here. So, obviously as a lay person, not someone who's an engineer or in the development business, but it does, just this discussion is pretty enlightening because if we're trying to use the permitting as a way to manage growth, it does seem to me that it's, we're really struggling with trying to get our arms around, have these decisions really provided a desired outcome, and then on an ongoing basis, what should we be looking at? So it does seem that we are quite ad hoc in terms of trying to gauge the pace of development with the guidelines we have in place. So I don't have an answer to this, and I'm glad that we're having the discussion, but it's clear to me, number one, it's pretty complicated. Number two, if we're struggling this hard with it as a group of professionals and leaders, then you can imagine, what the perceptions are in the public about this. And so this is, I'm not providing any answers, unfortunately, but I'm just underscoring the problem statement that it would be very, very hopeful to be able to come out of this with 2 or 3 things we think we can do tactically and perhaps strategically to get a better handle on this, so we can understand ourselves what the pace is it appropriate, and number 2, help to educate and reassure the public if that's possible in this environment. So again, it's just an observation, but it's pretty complicated, even for the folks that watch it closely. So. And I think updating the data would, certainly be helpful. And I know we'll refine this as we go. We're still in the early stages, but, I appreciate the level of detail in the discussion. Thank you.
So I guess one of the questions, and maybe Alan, it was really sort of pinged off the example you gave. Though we haven't seen where the scenario has come up that, one sort of development, I liked it again, the common scheme of development has broken up into, 5 different subdivisions and then subsequently tried to come in and pull all the growth permits. We haven't even really come close to that scenario or that concern, but it does exist given the language. So I guess the question is that something, I guess there's 2 questions as I understand it, and this is based on my conversations with folks on the ordinance committee, is what is this committee's sense of the existing approach to sort of common scheme of development, having multiple subdivisions within there, I think would be a helpful piece of information or initial recommendation, if you will, to the ordinance committee coming up at their meeting in a week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. So I don't know if folks feel that they have enough information to weigh in. Again, this could be an area where maybe more is needed. I'll sort of turn that question back to you.
When I first considered it, and the reason why I asked the question was that it was a little disturbing to me to think that one developer had the ability to basically control all the building permits in any one given year. I mean, that to me just doesn't seem like a good idea. But I guess as I'm thinking about it more, is that what triggers our going to the reserve pool? Because we find ourselves in a position where maybe 1 or 2 contractors are controlling the bulk of the permits, and then in order to be able to satisfy other developments, that we dip into the reserve pool.
So I'll just make a reminder that the reserve pool is set aside for only very specific type of projects. And those are projects that are part of a contract zone, and that council has said, reserve pool is that the project's eligible for the reserve pool. Piper Shores being a good example of that.
Yep.
Dwelling units maybe allocate from the reserve pool can be allocated to projects that are part of an affordable housing project in which at least 50% of the dwelling units are affordable. So again, we talked about the South Portland housing development, that would be eligible.
Yep.
And then the last one being dwelling units to which that are part of a project that is taking advantage of, and I'm paraphrasing, either the affordable housing density bonuses or the development transfer provision bonuses in the zoning ordinance. So those are the only 3 type of projects that would be eligible. So
Okay.
in your sort of unlikely scenario that you painted where, one developer comes in and pulls all the permits, if, Jane, John, Joe Smith owned a piece of property and wanted to build a single family unit, they would not be eligible to pull from the reserve pool.
Yeah.
I really like Alan's question. I'm going to follow that up with saying, is this why fractionalization was needed?
So again, fractionalization, partially gets at this issue maybe, but fractionalization is only for multifamily, right?
Correct, but
So-
developers can, the example that you just gave us with the elderly housing, 60 units is actually 30, so that developer can actually increase the number of units that they produce in the town.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the correlation with the 20% allocate. I'm sorry.
So
I'm
instead
missing
of-
the nexus here.
Oh, okay, so the nexus would be, so that developer's annual allocation is not 60 units for that elderly housing, but it's 30. So in other portions of the subdivision, they could have other 60, they could potentially have twice as many units as growth permits. Am I missing the point?
So I agree with the last statement that they could
Okay.
have twice as many units as permits.
Yep. So
Again,
that basically
this-
they can maximize their 20% allocation.
I guess so. Let's pull it away from the South Portland housing example,
Okay.
for the reason that they are eligible for the reserve pool, and there isn't sort of that 20% max on the reserve pool. So this 20% is only on the annual allocation. So if we think about it in terms of, where was I headed here? So again, so if someone has a 60 unit permit, 60 unit building, that's going to be market rate.
Mhm.
They would only be eligible for 27 growth permits in 1 year.
Mhm.
So basically what that development would have to do if they wanted, because we talked about, right, as Tom said, you can't just sort of build half a building, right? You build a whole building. So that developer could actually pull, say, 27 growth permits in 2020, pull 3 more growth permits in 2021. Now they have the 30 growth permits and they can start building their building in 2021.
I'm with you, but now that that subdivision cannot have any more sort of growth permits authorized in that subdivision. However, that developer is not limited, correct?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, the language is about the development, not about the developer. So
Right.
if Saunders Construction LLC has a project in North Scarborough and one in West Scarborough and one in down in Higgins Beach, wherever, those are all separately considered.
Correct, but in Saunders subdivision, I can only put one 60 unit. Like, let's take the Jocelyn Place example that you just said, Jay, which is that 60 unit that's actually giving, but I need 30 units in either order to do that, right?
30 permits, yeah.
Yep, so in 1 year, I can only build that one building in my subdivision, in Saunders subdivision, because I've had to borrow from last year or next year to go past the 27 units in that subdivision, correct?
Well, I guess what I would say is in that scenario, you bought 27 growth permits in 20. You buy 3 more growth permits for this subdivision, this one subdivision, to finish off that building,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
That leaves that property, let's assume that property has more area and
Yep.
more, and
Right.
you want to do a 24 single family units. You could-
Even simpler, I want to do the
Okay.
same building again in the future.
then
Okay,
you- Yeah,
so I've already used 3 permits from 2021.
Yep.
And now I'm short 24 permits.
Yep.
Or I have 24 permits left to work. So in order for me to get 30 permits for that same building in my subdivision, I need to borrow from the future year again.
right. So what you could do, so, okay, I understand the example. So you come in, you get planning board approval for 2 60 unit
Mhm.
buildings
Yep,
that are each building only needs 30 growth permits.
right,
Essentially the way, and if you're not eligible for the reserve pool, so these are all market rate, it's not part of a contract zone,
right, right.
you could pull 27 in 20 growth permits in 2020 and 3 in 2021 to build your first building.
Correct.
Then you could purchase 24 more in 2021,
Mhm.
sorry,
Yep.
21.
I'm with you.
And then what's the math? 6 more in 2022, and then you could build that building in 22.
Okay. Okay.
So
I'm s-
there
I'm
you're
s-
pacing, and that's what the growth
Yep.
management ordinance seeks to do.
Yeah,
Haste
and
the
if-
rate of growth, right? It
But
doesn't,
if there wasn't fractionalization, Jay, go with me even further. If there
I'm
wasn't fractionalization, I could only build one of those 60 units in 2 years.
You wouldn't even get to that because you can only 20.
That's right. That's right.
And I'll make mention, growth permits expire within 6
6
months. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Yep. Okay, I'm getting it. I'm understanding it now. Thank
Give her
you.
another coffee.
So it's a governor for multifamily development.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize if I'm the only one who needed the sort of the background example to
It
do
helps.
that.
It helps understand it. Yeah.
So I guess, let me ask this question. There's sort of two questions I'm going to ask. Are folks, and again, does I understand if there's more information needed, certainly let's talk about that. But is the committee generally comfortable with the way the ordinance is constructed, that within a common scheme of development, a developer could access more than 20% of the annual allocation? And I think the second part of that question is, do folks share I won't even say share a concern. What do folks think about the scenario Alan laid out as to one common scheme of development potentially absorbing all the permits in a given year? Is that something that we might want to address, or are we okay with the language as it sits? So really two questions, because I think that scenario, again, is it possible? Seems like it's possible. Is it likely? I think, as Alan said, seems unlikely, but unlikely things do happen. So I guess that's a question I would leave with you all in terms of, are you generally, does the concept of enabling a common scheme of development to pull multiple permits, or more than the 20%, generally make sense? And if yes, then I would think that's where the second question would come in. So I guess I'll ask it, let's start there. Are you generally comfortable with the way it's constructed, or are there concerns that should be addressed?
Speaking for, yes, generally I am comfortable. I guess the fact that we haven't bumped up against it yet, obviously it is an extreme case, extreme hypothetical, but that needs a little digestion, I think, to understand exactly if it needs to be addressed with ordinance.
Thanks, Dave.
Any other thoughts?
I'm trying to put everything that I want to say together. That's what I'm hesitating on. I guess the first thing is, I given the fact that we've been like this for certainly for 10, 15 years or better, I'm not concerned like I was when I first thought that one developer could take everything, because the chances of that are probably pretty small in happening. And I think that there's enough going on where with the concept that really the idea of the 27 permits is to kind of keep in check in any one given location the amount of growth in any one given year. Obviously, the scenario of doing something over a 2 or 3 year period is out there and will occur at some point if it hasn't already. And the Downs is probably a great example of where something like that could happen. I guess I would want to put I'd want to put additional thought still into the concept of how we're using the units and what they represent. So what, I know that we're saying that a single family 750 square feet or less is 0.5. I get that. I think that in terms of growth, that could be an area that we could look at as a potential way to slow down growth, and thinking more in terms of the 2/3 units and what they represent, and whether or not there is a sufficient need to continue using that unit as opposed to going to a full unit. So that one is still in my mind up in the air. I haven't really decided what I think or what I would like to see in that regard. I'm not sure that the ordinance committee really cares which developer is doing what. I think they're more concerned about quantity of growth, or the how many building permits are getting issued or not getting issued. I don't think who they're getting issued to is really a concern of the ordinance committee. But that's my opinion solely. And so I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time in that area. I don't think they care who builds them. I think they're more concerned about how many get built.
I will say, I do know that Ken Johnson, who is on the ordinance committee, has expressed that concern about who builds them as well as how many.
Okay.
I think to your, your unlikely scenario that you spelled out, I think that maybe Ken, and I haven't had that explicit conversation with him around that example, but I do know that is one of the areas of interest for him on the ordinance committee. So
Okay.
Along that same line, if I could just pick up a little bit where Alan left off, is I can understand knowing in 2007 what was to come in 2008, basically the Great Recession, and the faucet basically being turned off on a lot of housing financing and the like. I can understand you wouldn't want to tie up too many growth permits with one sort of subdivision for financial risk purposes, I guess, kind of thing. But I think I agree more with what Alan was saying, which is it's not necessarily who is being issued the permits, but how much and how quickly, and the quality, or the quality and quantity of the outputs. I would say that yes, I'm fairly comfortable with what Dave had mentioned, sort of the comfort with this practice as it is. I also wouldn't want to see it's good to hear that there's no concern that one subdivision would gobble up 100%, that we do have sort of a fail-safe in place for that. I think that's good. If we change it, I think we do need a lot more information, because my concern is this being used in combination or as a function of fractionalization is my concern. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
just a clarifying point. I'm not sure I suggested there is a fail-safe.
Okay.
So there is, it seems like an unlikely scenario is what I've tried, as Alan had said, and I think others had said, that one development would come in, but it is a possibility.
But the fact of the matter is, though, if you've got a developer who wants to come in and build a 60-unit building, he can still do it today. He's just got to go through the contract zone process. So he's not limited to the fact that the growth permits aren't there. He just has to choose a different vehicle to get there.
A different phasing plan.
Yeah, or a different phasing plan. But like, we've been saying, you'd have to cross over years, over a 6-month period with your building permits in order to be able to get more than 27. So if a particular contractor, developer wants to build in any one given year more than 27 or gather more than 27 of the permits, we're not saying they can't do that, but what we're saying is you can't do it conventionally. you would have to go through a different route like a contract zone to make that occur. Is that a valid statement, Jay?
Certainly, yeah, if someone, contract zone could be used to appropriate more growth permits than are otherwise eligible. That, I mean, even if the development, again, you know, a 60-unit development on a certain, may be allowed by zoning, but if the growth permits aren't there, then certainly developer has that ability to go to council and ask for a contract zone agreement, because that's one of the spelled out ways of accessing the reserve pool.
Right.
I'm not sure if I'm hearing, I'm just gonna put it on the table, because I get the sense, tell me if I've gone wrong, that while there's general, the committee seems generally okay with the way the ordinance is crafted, allowing multiple, within a common scheme of development, allowing multiple subdivisions to occur. But I think I'm hearing, and this is where I'm, correct me if I've gone wrong, that you do see that you wouldn't want to see that common scheme being able to use up all the permits in a given year. And so that might be something for the ordinance committee to look at, is just further refinement that really spells out, okay, within a common scheme, any one subdivision is eligible for 20%. However, within a common scheme of development, maybe there's another threshold. And I don't know what that number is at this point. Is that, am I reading too much into the conversation? If I am, tell me.
Andy, did you have your hand up there?
I did.
Yeah.
I was reviewing the memo that Jay and Karen sent us, the administrative procedure. They're identifying one thing that might be an issue or something that we can do a little bit more, but property owners are able to submit a growth permit application prior to a building permit. And of course, the growth permit's good for 6 months. So there's a little problem there. Said many of the applications are submitted simultaneously, but occasionally they receive the growth permit applications in advance of the building permit. And staff offered for consideration an amendment that would require growth permits and be submitted at the same time as the building. And that's expressed where you've got somebody doing part of the project in December and then, you know, getting more being able to access more, because you separate the two things. So just words of wisdom, not from me, but from Jay and Karen.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of their concerns.
So it seems like we need, I think we need a little bit to sleep on this one a little bit, get a better handle of it. And whatever you put forward, Jay.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, it's a circle thing. I mean, it's everything coming together and, you know, trying to separate it out so that it benefits both, you know, the builder and the resident, and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want your job, Jay. Thank you.
We're also getting close to the end here of our allotted time, so I don't know how the committee feels about us continuing the discussion, but I also see maybe we'll have a little public comment at the very end here once we're done. I see hand up. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, I guess I just, again, I know that I'm new to the process, so thank you for allowing me time to sort of get up to speed and understand the different implications, even of these 5 questions and concepts and how they relate to one another. So I thank you all for being patient. But as I'm putting these connections together, I can't help but think about the connections that we could be thinking proactively about, which are specifically impact fees and front loading sort of the impact that we have on the broader strategic issues that Dawn had mentioned and I had mentioned. For example, we already have a traffic impact fee and I think a school impact fee, but we don't have like a public safety impact fee, meaning as we get all these people in town, we need to increase our fire, EMS, police department. We need to be thinking about a public safety impact fee and a natural resource impact fee, I think, if we want to be proactive and push the conversation to the next level to say, okay, we're comfortable with past conversations, past legislation, and let's put our proactive glasses on and say, what can we do in this year without the baseline information? And to me, that would be thinking about proactive impact fees on those two things or other broader strategic issues that the counselors are worried about. Thank you.
I think that's a good segue to really where I think as a committee and as a community, we need to sort of start to pivot to is getting the revised or updated comprehensive plan in place, because that type of language is explicitly in the comprehensive plan, and impact fees need to spin off what's in the comprehensive plan. I know that came from a discussion with the fire chief and police chief about a public safety impact fee. So I do think, this growth management discussion certainly leads into many other things, but it's one of the tools. And so I think, for the short-term discussion, really trying to focus the discussion sort of on those immediate answers. And then I totally agree that these are much bigger and interconnected issues to be thinking about, certainly. So I guess I'm just going to push on the committee just a little bit. Dave, I appreciate that we're now well over our normal allotted hour and a half, and we're going to allow public to speak again. But this is the one of the 5 sort of areas that the ordinance committee has asked for your initial recommendations. And I'm not sure that I've heard, and it's obviously you do make what the committee will, but I haven't heard sort of the cohesive or consensus coming out of the committee in terms of this item around allocation of permits by project or by common scheme. I think, again, what I heard is that generally comfortable with the current approach is the one thing that I tangibly feel I've heard. Outside of that, I guess that would be what would be reflected in any sort of summary comments that I would type at this time. So if I'm missing something, please let me know.
I guess the fact that we haven't bumped up against it yet leads me to believe that it's okay the way it is, but let's hear what others have to say.
Yeah, I concur with Dave on that. I mean, I would think that if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened by now. And if we're not hearing a lot of complaints from other developers, and you've been doing this now, Jay, for some time here in town, if you're not hearing complaints like that, then it's probably not something that we've got to really tackle today or in the next few months. I'm saying
Short term.
but I don't know what you hear, so.
No, we really haven't heard. I mean, I guess the only thing we hear is that people like to be able to get a hold of more than 20%. There hasn't been sort of the common scheme that has ever been worried about coming in and taking them all. I haven't ever had that conversation with anyone. But again, could happen.
I mean, just the fact that our 10-year average is 134 kind of would lead you to believe that, nobody's coming in and taking, 3/5 of the permits.
But that 134 is with a significant amount of fractionalization.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
contract.
Actually, just a point of clarification on that. The 134 isn't about the fractionalization. It's about the reserve pool. Because when we're talking about that 134 number is growth permits, not units. So we really, it gets it gets murky. I totally appreciate that. And maybe I don't do the best job of explaining it, but that 134, actually we can go back to, oh gosh, where's the info? Actually, going back to the memo, I guess is where it is. That's just permits, not number of units. So again,
Yeah, I mean, so conceivably you could have 268 units.
so again, I'm going to share my screen just to try to highlight this point. So you're seeing my screen now, I assume?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2017, just it's the one that jumps off the page, obviously. We did 325 growth permits. 135 of those were from the annual allocation. What does that leave us with? 190, I suppose, from the reserve pool. This is the number of units. So just to keep in mind, the 134 is really about the orange, not about the gray. At least in terms of the average.
Yep.
I hope that makes sense. It somewhat does in my mind, but I might be talking in circles at this point.
Jay, I just want to tell you that you're doing a tremendous job. I recognize that that Karen is not here and Jay is not, and Jamel is not here, and you're doing the work of 3 people and you're doing it very well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So Jay, what would you like from us to move forward here?
Well, yeah, so I think I hearing no other conversation on this item, again, I'm gonna draft up, the minutes will go, all these documents will go to the ordinance committee, but what I'll also try to do is just a quick summary memo of the 5 questions that were asked. And I will summarize, I already gave you the summary of 3 of them earlier. I think on this point, which is the allocation by developer, the summary would be that what I heard is the committee is generally comfortable at this time. That there doesn't seem to be a need for an immediate change, allowing for multiple 20% within a common scheme of development. That's the approach we have today, and I haven't heard any major concerns there. So and then the other item, what else did we talk about earlier today? Fractionalization. This is one where, frankly, there's just a lot more information that is required before any recommendations can be made one way or the other. So the recommendation is to really get at the data. And I'll try to enumerate what those data points are, again, going back through my notes. But that's what I'm hearing, that we don't have there's no position, it's more information needed.
And look at what drove the decision back in 2008, 7 and 8, yeah.
Yep. And again, so that ordinance committee meeting, for those that are interested, is going to be on August 20th, I believe, at 4 o'clock. Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah, I think that's right. It's the regularly scheduled meeting for August. Jean Marie will be back by then. So yeah, that's then we're looking forward to picking this up. And I would say that just generally that discussion is great. I think we're touching on the right issues. The dialogue, I think, is penetrating and trying to get at the effects, and the facts around what's really happening. I would say that the general thing is that we're really just trying to get our arms around being able to explain better the volume and pace of change, and what are we using to regulate that. So I think that's, it's a dialogue, and we're getting deeper into it. It's more complex than I think, the average person, can grasp, and even the folks that work with it closely. So, one other thought I'd leave you with is that the thing that'll help us as a council will be, a flag at the front end on things that, require our decision making. Typically now that is, those are things like zoning changes, contract zone applications and amendments, and also appropriations. Often we don't see those things, particularly appropriations, until the development is all the way, well through the planning board process, including the permitting. So, and the assignment of growth permits. So that's the real disconnect for us right now, is we're at a disadvantage to try to, help educate the council and the public on that. So I, appreciate the work you're doing, and we're supporting it entirely and deferential to your professional advice. But we realize this is a journey, and, it's gonna, we're at the beginning of it. So thanks.
Do you think it'd be helpful and we can talk about this offline, so never mind, I won't use up time on
All right.
that.
And sorry about getting off on a tangent, but I just want to kind of get that comment in there. Thanks.
Much appreciated, Don. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. So should we wrap up, Jay and members? Is there any public comment that we need to, that anybody wants? I can't see.
Yeah, I do see. So Betsy Gleistein is it's the person remaining as an attendee, and she does have her hand up if you want to allow public comment at the end again. I'll
Objection?
defer to the board.
Okay.
Okay. Betsy, you should be coming up here. You're muted currently. There you go.
I'll be very brief. Really good discussion, much appreciated. You really got, it left me with a number of questions that I'll take offline, but it seems like there's the complexity around this is, the regular permit pool, the fractionalization, the growth pool, contract zones, and then subdivisions, and how those play into this, because as Jay said, apartment building a subdivision, and so I'm wondering what is a subdivision within one of these master plans is been by these growth permits, and is that something that we want to maintain, to have it work that way? I think we've heard one developer say, and it sounds like perhaps the way we have it, folks who are developers have to kind of maybe do things in a perhaps unnatural way in order to get under the growth permit. So I'm not asking to understand that better, and I feel like this discussion kind of brought that to light. So I'll be looking into that, for my own information and trying to understand that better. So I really appreciate all this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so anything you want to wrap up, Jay?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would make mention of is our next meeting. So let's see. So we have ordinance committee is meeting on the 20th. There are a couple other things. We have some zoning initiatives that are kicking around that we need to pick up. So I'm hopeful we can get back. We can think about our next regular scheduled meeting, which is typically the first Friday of the month. I would say that first Friday of the month is Friday the 4th, which is the Friday right before Labor Day. I don't know what folks' plans are, but if does it make sense to maybe take a look at September the 11th, which is then after Labor Day? That way, if folks want to take a long weekend, they don't have to feel compelled to show up here Friday morning at 8 o'clock before heading out of town. So I'll leave that all to you. But I was thinking maybe September 11th as our next date.
I'm open either way. You want to do an email poll, maybe?
I can do that.
Got a couple members that aren't here, so.
Yep, I will do that. Yep.
The 11th would work for me, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good either way.
Works for me.
Yeah, so maybe just Jean Marie and Corey.
I'll send an email out shortly.
So did we say, is it the 4th or the 11th, or did we just decide the 11th?
I'm going to send an email around to just see if Corey and Jean Marie are also available on the 11th. I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Motion to
All right.
adjourn?
Second,
Second, yeah. Last discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. Again, sorry about that, guys. I forget what's happening. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you
Bye,
all.
everybody.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much.